Hello, this is your teacher Tara. I'm on the floor today because this is the way I can get the Banyan and me in the same shot. Your first step when you're sewing together your Banyan is, well, actually your first step is, if you have a fabric that ravels a lot, you want to take all these raw seams and you're going to want to zigzag them in order to go and make them not unravel at an untoward time, like while you're wearing it. This will help make it stronger. That's what you have all those fun zigzag stitches on your machine for, and that is the easiest way to make them not ravel. And for that, you simply go over the edge, back and forth with the little zigzag going right along the edge. That sort of squeezes in those threads so that it doesn't escape. But after you do that to your loose seams, the raw seams, what you're going to do is you're going to go and take the sleeves and you're going to go and put them into the sleeve slots with the open seam for both of them at the top of the Banyan. And so you're going to go and put the sleeve in a line going down the arm and then back up the arm. That's step one. So, to make that happen, I'm going to take the right sides of the sleeve and I'm going to pin it into place. Going down the arm slot. And then going back up the arm slot. It'll be a little funky at the corner. You just have to try and make it obey you. Also, if you find out that you cut them slightly off from one another, that the slot is not in fact the correct length, you can extend your slot. So always when you're going to make the mistake of having one be a little off, it's better to have the slot be a little too short than to have the sleeve be a little too short, because you can always cut the slot lower, but you can't always make the sleeve wider. So on here, indeed, I have to go and do a little bit. Let's see if I can get this to zoom in, since I have a conveniently rippable material. Show you how I'm going to make that slot a little bigger. Okay, here I am. So, since the slot is in a straight line on here, you can see the slot isn't quite enough for the edge of the fabric. We're going to do really close edges. We're going to go and put that right up to the edge. Now, if we were using a really big seam allowance, you would need it to actually be that way, where it had a little bit less room in the one than in the other. But for this, where we're going to be doing a fairly narrow seam allowance, you want to have it pretty close to what you want as your finished edge. There you go. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then we'll start sewing them up. So you can see, zoom out a bit. Looks like this, and then like this. Okay? And I'll use the narrowest possible stitch I can do. Indeed, I will probably use one of the artificial overlock stitches of the machine. One that zigzags and then binds up things simultaneously. Hello there. So, if you're in my class and you happen to have taken home one of the Loner Burnett's, I'm going to show you how you can go and do the artificial zigzag, the artificial overlock. And to do that, you're going to want to have your top, now let's get that to zoom in. Okay, you want to have your top thing be up to a 6, this little wheel. You want to be in the center position. You want to put it on the little red super stitches, or whatever S stands for. And then down here to go on to the letter D. And the little red stitch in there is a fancy form of zigzag stitch or embroidery stitch that imitates what an overlock can do. It isn't the same thing as an overlock, it doesn't use multiple needles and threads, but it does something pretty close to that. And so if you're dealing with something like what I have here, which is a little bit of kind of beat up cotton fabric, and you want to simultaneously do a sort of overcast edge and put together sections, this actually is a pretty good one. Now, you need to pin very well and be very sure of what you're doing, because once you get this kind of a stitch into your thing, you are going to, if you sew it wrong, you're going to be using a whole lot of time with your seam ripper getting it out. And it's going to kind of chew up the fabric a bit. So this is good for a project like this where you have simple, straight seams. It's not really a great one for doing something too complicated with when you're new. But I think I can probably trust you to do that on these straight things, especially if you use something like a bed sheet or one of these cotton printed bedspreads. It's fairly easy to sew. So if you have a project that is that, and you want to use a special stitch that gets the overlocked edge thing to happen as well as the stitching to go together that way, you go to 6 on the dial, the S1 on the special stitch thing, and your special stitch number is number 6. So if you don't have that, look on your machine and see if it has some sort of super duper stitch like that, or just sew a straight stitch and then go over it again with a zigzag, and it will do approximately the same thing. Okay? So here goes. Pretty slowly. Even though the needle is moving fast, it only goes a little bit at a time. So pause, pull out your needles between times. This is not a stitch you want to try and sew over your needles. Concentrate very much on keeping both layers exactly matched. Pulling or pushing, you're just trying to keep them in a line. And pull the pins out ahead. Get to the corner, you want to make sure to catch both parts, but don't go down too much for past the end, or you'll end up with a weird sort of tucky thing under your armpit. So when you get to that spot, then stop and pivot and realign your seams so you don't get a weird tuck, and you turn around that corner. And just slightly. Lift the needle up and pull it out. It's not perfect. That's what seam rippers are for. When you have something where it does do the little tuck, no matter how hard you try, and you want to fix it, what you do is you flip it over and you go and use your seam ripper. So, as you can see here, I've got a little tuck in the armpit. Now, a seam ripper allows you to pick out just the part you need to pick out and no more. But you have to be careful with it because you see the little red ball and the point. Between that little red ball and that point is a teeny tiny razor. And so you use the point to get into little tight spaces and pull just a stitch or two at a time. Now, if you make big mistakes, you can go and undo whole seams. But we just have a little mistake here. I want you to see how we fix that, because this is a really, really likely mistake in this particular spot. Now, worst case scenario, you have a little funky thing in your armpit. I won't hold it against you. But if you don't want a little funky thing in your armpit, being able to pull that little bit of fabric out that has gotten tucked in there wrong will allow you to fix it. Oh. It's just this little tiny spot, and I can fix that little tiny spot just by getting a little better at pinning it into place or stitching it into place. So I'm going to go do that again on the machine. This time I'm going to do it without pins. And before you do it, you're going to want to pull out all those little extra threads, because otherwise they'll probably get in your way and knot things up again. So that's what you do if you make a little mistake. You have a little thing in your kit. If you either got one of the loaner sewing machines that came with one, or if you went and bought one, you've got one. And this is the thing that allows you to fix small mistakes before they become big mistakes. Okay? That's important to know. So, I know that last one was hard, but you will be pleased to know there's only one more seam, and the next one is kind of easy because it's a straight line. How this is going to go together is so simple. You're going to grab your sleeves and you're going to start the edge of each of the cuffs. And you're going to pin that. You just need a few pins because you want to line up the other part of the arm seam, the top part, so that the seams match. It just looks better. If you've got a bedspread and it isn't perfectly even, that's normal. It's a bedspread. But you will find also bedspreads are kind of stretchy, so you can get them to match when you've got them under the machine. You just have to remember to stretch. Which is why it's good to have the pins in place. Then halfway between those two, I'm going to put another pin so that you know where halfway between the two is, and it'll remind you to stretch. Then, you do the same thing on the other side. You're going to put the two right sides together on the edge and on the shoulder seam. Shoulder seam, and if you need to, you're going to stretch. See, on this part I don't have to. Old bedspreads. I'm going to have to do a lot of repairing of holes, but It is a recycling project. Now, the only part that seems like it might be tricky is this, making your neck hole. Well, you don't actually make a neck hole. You kind of make a neck slot. You're going to go and take this and lay it out. Ideally on your lap, just like this. And what you want to do is you want to find about the center. And probably the easiest way to do that is match up those seams that are for the shoulders. There you will find your center. So you find your center, and then you're going to put one part of the front there, the other part of the front right there. And you're going to pin those. And they probably will not perfectly match up at that spot, but there will be a little extra fabric. Don't worry about it. What you're going to do is you're going to lay it flat. Until you get close to the front, like maybe where your pattern edge is, and you're going to go and say, okay, I want to have the pattern edge lay flat, then I'm going to do a tuck just past that. Or you can do what I did earlier and stretch. That'll sort of make it gently gather in. But it's easier to go to your pattern edge. Do a tiny tuck there. And pattern edge. Make sure it's about the same on both sides. And a tiny tuck there. It'll give you a little bit more fullness across the chest, which will help to make it overlap a bit. But you won't be overlapping it all at the back of your neck. And then you make these two match up, and then you simply stitch from one set of pins to the cuff on the other set of pins. And iron it open, and or do the magic zigzag fake overlock thing there. And, well, I'm about to do that, so you'll see it next. So, backwards. The clumping noise is the thickness of the edge of the bedspread. I have a sidebar. Something funny to know. If you ever see an industrial one of these machines, you will usually see this metal piece that comes out in the front here. They do this because when industrial stitchers are working and being really intent at what they're doing, and they're going real fast, and so they sometimes get so to this little thing up here that they whack themselves in the nose. And so it's a little metal bar to stop you from being able to do that. So be careful. You can get intent, but don't get so intent you're doing this, or you'll hit yourself in the forehead or the nose or whatever portion of your anatomy is closest to this thing. The take-up lever can be harmful. that is a very large one, and you need to make shoulder tucks. This is essentially how you make the shoulder tucks. So you plan the shoulder tucks into this seam. Fold them and pin them, and then just sew this seam through them, and it will hold them in place. Same way it's holding that one. Use the little tucks in place. If you went to your local head shop and bought a big wool tapestry type bedspread to be a basic bathrobe, you want it to be something that looks cool and wizardry. Manage it is you just do some tucks, seam to get the shoulder width you want. This kind of fast boring stuff is also why this little guard is on place in the lumber machine. Doing this kind of thing, that more often than not, gets you to sew over your fingers. I speak from experience. And now, I'm just going to iron all the seams flat and put it on. You don't have to watch the ironing. It's tedious. And so, once you have it all sewn together, it's going to seem just like a little odd to you, like at the neck. There's no neck hole. You don't actually need a neck hole, because once you've got it like this, you simply go put your arms in, and the slot for your neck puts it right around here, and uses the textile in the most appealing look. And it even makes it just a hair, just a hair shorter in the front, so you don't trip over. So this is what it looks like when you're finished. And now you can go and try and sew yours. Thank you.